Okay, thank you everybody for staying with us. So my name's Dr. Nick Cole from the M&D Association in the UK, and I'm the chair of the Scientific Advisory Council. So the Scientific Advisory Council is a centralised resource, and really our role is to review and provide a global perspective on scientific and biomedical announcements, information and opportunities relating to ALS M&D. So what that really means is we kind of digest the information that's out there and try to put it in a form that's understandable to advise the community. So we're here for you. If you have any questions or you need to understand anything in more detail, you can always get in touch with us. And what we're going to do today is have an introduction to members of the panel, and then we'll open the floor to any questions you might want to ask us going forward. So the Scientific Advisory Council consists of 13 members. Obviously, not everybody's here at the moment, and we have representatives from all over the world, including Colombia, China, Sweden, and Italy, and the USA and South Africa, many places as well. And so we'll just introduce the panel members. So if you could, we'll go down the line, introduce yourselves, and just give us a brief bio of who you are. Over to you, Bec.
So I'm Bec Sheean. I am the Research Director at Fight M&D in Australia, so down in Melbourne. A bit about me, I guess my background is in preclinical M&D research, so I was in an M&D research lab working on drug treatments in cell and animal models of M&D. And then about 8 years ago, I met one of the founders at Fight M&D and was really inspired to hang up my lab coat and join the organisation. So I've been with Fight for 8 years. I look after oversee all of our investments in research and care. And I'm really passionate about including the lived experience voice in research. So I've been really grateful through my role to be able to be involved in a number of great initiatives that are bringing researchers and people with lived experience together.
Thank you. Jeanine.
I'm Jeanine Heckman. I'm a neurologist from Cape Town, South Africa, and I've already introduced myself as the part of the ALS Africa Research Network. And yes, I'm very happy to represent Africa on the SAC.
Thank you. Martina?
You must be tired of hearing from me. So I'm Martina de Majo. I am the Scientific Director for the International Alliance. My background, I'm a neuroscientist and researcher by training, worked in the ALS and MND space for almost 15 years now with my PhD and postdoc, and then with some industry experience, and I'm very excited to be here.
And I'm David Taylor. I'm the Vice President of Research and Strategic Partnerships at ALS Canada for the past 12 plus years. And I'd just like to say I've been in ALS for about 24 years, and it is my everyday passion. And I'm just so grateful to be a part of this community. And I say thank you for that opportunity.
Hi, everyone. Kuldip Dave, Senior Vice President of Research at the ALS Association. I'm a pharmacologist by training. Been at the association for over 5 years now, and happy to be on the panel.
Thank you. So I thought we could just start with a few minutes on things that we think are exciting and quite challenging in our own areas at the moment, and we'll just move down the line before we take questions from the floor. So something that I'm particularly excited about in the UK is the start of this pre-trial platform called Experts ALS, which is a way of really taking a small number of people with motor neuron disease and to take drugs. We have lots of potential therapies and compounds, and we need to prioritize which ones could move forward into larger clinical trials. So the principle behind Experts ALS is to measure the neurofilament levels in a small number of people before and after giving an indication to see whether or not the drugs might be working before they move them into a larger clinical trial. So that's something that's just starting off in the UK at the moment, which is quite a novel and new approach, which we're very interested to see how that turns out. Bec?
Great. So some of the things that I think are really exciting in Australia at the moment, we have in Melbourne an M&D drug screening platform. The team there have been able to demonstrate a phenotype in some of the stem cells from people with with sporadic MND. I think that's really interesting. It's still very, very early, but it's really interesting to see the potential of that. In Australia, we're also supporting the development of national clinical care guidelines for MND, which don't exist in Australia at the moment, so that's another exciting opportunity. But I think thinking more globally or more broadly, one of the things I'm really excited about is just the enthusiasm for collaboration, and I think we've seen that over the last 2 days, that people are really starting to think about things globally, and I think a lot of people are doing great work in their own countries or their own regions, but I think we're starting to see that shift of we all need to work together to really move the dial.
Well, what excites me in my region is just the fact that we're starting to mobilize and trying to change the everyday experience of people living with ALS in Africa. They've been neglected for so long. So that's exciting, and we hope to grow slowly, step by step.
Bec, you stole my line. How did you know? Bringing a global perspective, what I'm really excited about is really all this fostering of collaborations, as Bec said, just between today and yesterday and the next few days, because, this is going to be a long week for most of us, a very exciting long week. We'll have events that will really show the value of collaboration. And I think now more than ever, I did my PhD in Europe and my postdoc in the US. And more than 10 years ago, those two areas basically weren't talking to each other. So the fact that we are able to talk to each other about basic science and about clinical research is incredibly exciting now more than ever.
So I was trying to think about this, and I was like, what am I most excited about? And then I kind of came up just about half an hour ago with the idea that, so I'm thinking back 10 years to where we are today, and I look at, we talked about Fight MND and all the money that's been raised, and the Netherlands has been able to do incredible things in 1 week, raise 7 or 8 million euro, and the UK MND Research Institute, the CDMRP DoD program is $40 million US for research. ALS Association, MND Association, there's more money than ever, and this is incredible, and I just keep thinking, 10 years ago when Answer ALS started at 40 million, I thought, that's so much, and now we're finally getting in a realm where we're getting enough that we can do something, which is incredible in the field. And it's still not enough. We know it's not enough. So then it comes to what Fernando said yesterday from ALS Therapy Development Institute. I'm not sure if he's still here, and that's complementarity. And when I look at the landscape, not only is there more money, but all these funds, each of the individuals are starting to look at how can we fit a specific niche in the field and work complementary to each other, which I think is really exciting. Again, we're just getting to the start of that, and where we're going to be in 5 years, I think is going to be really exciting. And then last to that, I would say that there's no small coincidence that this is in large part due to concerted efforts, and we're not there yet, to the field making space. I'm looking for Norm. I don't know if he's here. Making space for valued advocacy of the community of people who are affected by ALS, because they are driving us to do that complementarity, and there's no voice that is more powerful to raise those funds that have come from those different areas than having them at the table in a more effective way than we have in the past. We still have a lot of work to do on all of these areas, but those three things combined make me very excited about where we can be in the next 5 years, and anyways, that's what I came up with.
Yeah, for me, I think the central dogma for neurodegenerative diseases has been that we can stop the disease or we can slow down the disease. And I think Khalsadi's data is showing us, and I think David said this earlier, that we can actually restore function. We're seeing that with patients reporting that on Khalsadi. What's really great about Khalsadi data, and Stephanie Fredette talked about this a little bit, is the real-world data are actually matching up with the double-blind study, and which is nice to see that now we have data in the real world that NFL is being reduced and that function may be restored. So, this whole idea of can we make ALS a livable disease? Yes, it's in a smaller population of SOD1 ALS, but it really tells us that the dogma of thinking about stopping or slowing the disease, we can go beyond stopping and slowing. We could potentially restore function. And so that is something that's really exciting.
Excellent. And if we can turn to what you think the challenges are in our own areas, just briefly. I mean, there may be many, but let's just have a quick run down the line. Do you want to start, Kuldip?
Do you want to start at your end?
Yeah?
Yeah.
Bec?
I think there's lots of opportunities and challenges. I think one of the things that this group talks about a lot is around how we work together and what are the things that we go after to move the dial on. I think we hear a lot about data and big data, and it's how do we bring that together, and then what do we look for? So I think having the time to do that strategically and to have the funding to be able to prioritize projects like that, I think it's an opportunity more than a challenge that we can tackle some of those big questions.
Well, I could speak for a long time on challenges, but I guess the bottom line is that we as the low middle income countries, we do need help, and we need financial help. I was just saying to Kuldip, we can make $1 go a long way, so it doesn't have to be big grants, but I would just put it out there that it would be, having a small pot of funds that the low middle income countries can compete for would be, I think, a good strategy.
So I think the challenge that I see, and this is going to be no surprise to anybody, is generally heterogeneity, and that is within the clinical population, but also as a basic scientist. It's somebody who worked with in vitro modeling, identifying that signal that the previous panel was talking about. We've made great progress, but it's still very, very hard to understand what that signal is. And so the challenge that I see is really heterogeneity in the population and in any prediction model.
And so one of the challenges, I will give a shout out to my colleagues, actually, Tammy and Elida, who put it much more eloquently than I was planning to now. But one of the things that we've talked about quite a bit is understanding that challenge right now between the urgency of the unmet need of the disease and that space where there seems to be a signal at a very small, underpowered clinical trial. We have a long history of being fooled by smaller, underpowered studies that turn out not to show efficacy in the end. And how do we figure that whole landscape out effectively and in the right way, collectively? And with that, the communications, and how do we balance the communications of what we know and what we don't know between the needs of industry to try to get investment for those trials and trying to help the community to understand what we really do know and understand from that data at that very limited stage before they've gotten to a pivotal trial. And I think that's a big challenge that we have to work out, and right now seems to be a particular hurdle for the scientific community in ALS. And I think Kuldip's going to...
Yeah, and the challenge I'm seeing is kind of related to what David is talking about, which is right after AMX 0035, Albrioza, was approved both in Canada and US, you saw a lot of excitement in the venture community. There was, a lot of positivity. And then when the trial failed and the drug was taken off the market, we are seeing the pendulum swing the other way. And that is really concerning because, and we're hearing this directly from small biotechs that are coming to the association and saying, we do not have funding to take our programs forward. And, something David said, companies are trying to balance that. How do they speak about their phase 1 and phase 2 data, while still exciting the venture community so that they can continue to keep going. I think that's a real challenge because we can't have companies. ALS1 had a symposium a couple of weeks ago, and every company, one after another, was talking about efficacy with an N of 12, N of 8, N of 14, N of 30. And that cannot happen in our space. We cannot be talking about efficacy with small, underpowered trials. But I understand why these companies are doing it, because if they only focus on what phase 1 and phase 2 is supposed to be, which is dose selection, PK/PD, target engagement, biomarkers, maybe the VC community is not interested in funding them. And so, it's a balance. How do we scientifically on this stage make sure that companies are not talking up efficacy in underpowered trials, but yet how do we, on this stage, provide a message to the venture community that ALS is still really tractable, and hopefully use Qalsody as an example of that.
Yeah, thank you. So we'll open the floor to any questions you would have. Please raise your hands. And if not, we'll go to the online questions. Do you have anyone like a question in the room? One at the back there. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for your comments. I was wondering if any of you had some thoughts around heterogeneity. What is working to try to draw a representative population in the trials?
It's a good question. Who would like to take that? Dave?
Clarify? Yeah, you. Do you want to clarify that, Rob, a little bit in terms of specifically how heterogeneity is affecting clinical trial outcomes, and how do we do a better job of approaching that, or was it something else?
Earlier, with the ALS Focus survey, we saw 95% of respondents were white. How do we make sure that clinical trials enroll a representative set of participants so that we can make the most informed conclusions?
Do you want to go? We work harder to address that, and we have, when you point those things out, we go to the appropriate people in this room who can help us, I think, to do better at that, and making sure that we're reflecting on that and figuring that out. I personally don't have a specific answer, but I think that the more we talk about it, the more we're going to try to figure out and do it. And I think even things that, like Allison presented before and stuff, tells us we have a lot to learn on how to approach people to have a more balanced understanding of who wants to be in trials, how do we incorporate people into trials, and obviously earlier with the different networks, how do we get this around the world, and how do we understand the disease in different areas around the world and how treatments will be effective. I don't know if that answers the question, but I think Martina was also going to.
I don't know. Is there? Does anybody? Oh, the question is there an example of an inclusive clinical trial, even, I guess, in another discipline? It doesn't have to be ALS.
No, yeah, specifically in ALS. Like, I'm reacting to your comment about heterogeneity being the challenge. And I'm sorry, I'm with a pharmaceutical company, Ionis. So I'm asking this question from that perspective. There's a lot of pressure on us to enroll clinical trials as quickly as possible. So in one way, you're disincentivized to enroll a representative population if you prioritize speed. But we want to do the best experiment possible, which means to have a representative population. So I'm asking for some ideas maybe from this illustrious panel on how pharmaceutical companies or early drug developers can think about addressing this. It's a very important topic in a lot of different disease areas. In rare disease, it gets even harder.
Yeah, well, the association has tried out a couple of things, Rob. I think you know about these. One is we had funded trial sites to increase the sort of the DEI component of how they're going out and reaching out to communities. And I'll give you an example. we funded Henry Ford Clinic in Detroit, and this is a clinic that was predominantly seeing white patients in the middle of Detroit. And so the idea being that our funding can be used to navigate patients from underrepresented areas into both the care of the multidisciplinary clinics, but also for the trials that are being run out of those same clinics. The other way is, working with groups like My Tomorrows to navigate patients, again, through their doctors to trials. I don't know if there's an example of a trial where we have successfully gotten full, the type of diversity that we would like to see.
And just to clarify, are we talking about US specific trials, or is it a global?
Yeah, I think diversity, and I think it's agnostic to the country. I think there's a greater focus of it here in the US for sure. And some of this comes, there is additional pressure from regulators and payers on having clinical trials be representative. So that's where my mind is going, coming from a pharmaceutical standpoint. I appreciate the conversation. I don't want to hog the mic. Thank you for the examples, Kuldip, and happy to talk about this later.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things we can talk about on that. And there's so many different layers of it. And also we're in Montreal, it's not here in the United States. I had to. I'm the token Canadian.
Thank you for the question.
Hi, I'm Matt Tilley from Fight MND. I want to ask a question about pharmaceutical companies, but I wonder if security could stand next to him first. I don't want to offend you. A question for the panel more generally, and you talked about funding, David, is that we obviously fund a lot of work across the whole ALS MND sector, but there are moments of jeopardy where we go, well, if we step in here, pharmaceutical companies are a little bit let off the hook, or are we creating a bad precedent where they start to think, okay, if we hold off long enough, funding entities will step in here and we're not so much responsible for it. And they're difficult decisions to make. I'm interested on, I guess, some sort of guidance or general thoughts from the panel around where do you think that responsibility lies?
In terms of funding trials, you're saying in terms of funding trials that maybe industry should be funding instead? Or, I think it's a problem we don't generally have in the field that much yet. And I think it's a great question to be having, to know that there is enough funding coming through certain philanthropic regions to be able to support clinical trials that are effective and getting to endpoints that are meaningful. Do we think, if we ever get to that stage, I think it's a good question, but globally, I'm not sure there are a lot of places where nonprofits are able to have enough funds to support supplanting. Even investigator-initiated trials are hard to fund sometimes in phase 3 level. So I don't know, I'll look down the panel as well in terms of, I think it's a great thing that we're at that space, but it's a good question that's leading to where we may get as I talk about us having more funding, and we need to consider it, absolutely.
Do you want to take anyone else want to add to that? What do you, Bec?
I think probably Matt's question's probably about those early phase investigator-initiated trials. Okay. And then when they get to a stage where you're looking at progressing it through to the next phase. Even things like for investigator-led trials, then an open label extension type setting where should a not-for-profit be the one that's funding that, when if the drug is effective, right, they're not going to be the ones that are going to benefit.
Yeah, and I was going to say the same thing. I think for early stage, phase 1, phase 2, to de-risk the program, I think that's where the nonprofit funding comes in. But when we provide funding for those type of projects, we ask the companies, where are you going to get the next funding from for phase 3? Because nobody on this stage should be funding phase 3. We should have de-risked the program enough where the companies can now either get venture funding or partner up with, larger pharma to take that program forward.
Yeah, and it's also important that the landscape's still attractive to investors as well. So if we we have a responsibility to make sure that things are done properly and communicated in the right way. And we don't need to be in the position where trials are failing all around us, or there's a difference between the way trials are conducted in different parts of the world. So I think it's really important the way that we present the M&D space as well to attract that investment. You know, I think that's a really important thing, the way the landscape is perceived.
And I just had, Nick, that maybe the UK is a really great place to have a chat, Matt, with, because, I mean, there's so much happening with repurposed therapies going into experts ALS, moving through to potentially the M&D SMART trial, the experience that you've had with Miracals in terms of being an investigator-initiated large, long trial, and what happens at that end stage between that balance of how do you get this potentially considered through a regulatory pathway or access, and also considering the potential of needing an industry partner to be involved in that. And that's obviously a very complex situation right now, but I think those learnings could really help a group like Fight M&D to help navigate those situations as well, don't you think? Or,
Yeah.
I don't know, I'm looking
No, I agree. I think it's important, yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks. Is there a question of... Sorry. Oh, we'll go to this guy. I can't see much.
Does it work? Okay. I was jumping to the previous question. I'm sorry, but I would like to help in finding eventually an answer. Because learning from other disease in which we are working for diversity group inclusion, especially because from the pharma perspective and also from the regulatory agency perspective, they ask us to build clinical trial in which we could represent the most part of the population. And one of the points we have found around the world is the first point is the language barrier. So maybe could be really useful having the same maybe guidelines or something like that, or also the outcome measures translated in different languages. This is one point we saw that could maybe match the answer from the regulatory agencies, and maybe for the pharma. Could be maybe useful work together in that direction. Maybe could be a really practical answer from your question. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Who I am? Okay, sorry. I'm Riccardo from Italy, especially from the ALS Italian Association, and now I will be a new member of the Alliance of ALS and MND. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment.
Hi.
We have a question here.
Marcela from Acela. I want to ask, what have we learned from previous trials that didn't succeed, and how is that shaping future research?
Yeah, really key question. You know, it's really important that we always learn from trials, and I think there's been many examples where we haven't learned, and we're still not learning, and that needs to be changed, whether it's target engagement or a biomarker that's measured in every single trial, a standardization across trials which are done in every different country. You know, I don't think we're in a really good place with that at all at the moment. And I think it's critical that every trial we learn something about the biology, we understand where it's gone wrong, or if it works, why it works. So, does anybody want to add a bit more to that, or?
I just, target engagement. We need to learn scientifically from the trials that we do, because it honors the participants that have taken their time and effort to be part of it. And if we've learned nothing from those trials, I think we need to push everyone who runs a trial to do their very best to do that, to make sure that we are not using that valuable, I don't even know how to say it appropriately, but doing that in a way that we're not learning and advancing the science, because I believe that's why people participate, is altruistically to drive the science forward.
We have a question here, Dave.
Thank you.
Hi, David Busak, Patient Fellow and ALS Network. I know there are lots of reasons, coming back to that question of diverse trials, there are a lot of reasons that make it hard to enroll people, but I think that Allison really hit on one, which is basic trust. I know in the U.S., at least in the Native American population and in the Black population, there's a huge amount of distrust. And in our current political environment in the U.S., there's a huge amount of distrust. So I'm sure there are similar things in other parts of the world, but how do we begin to overcome that distrust without getting Tricia, the trusted nurse or whatever her name was, to go to every household and say, you can trust us?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I mean, one of the things is that people don't often want to listen to experts. So, you know, if we've got patient fellows or ambassadors that are going out there and explaining communication in a way that brings that trust, I think that's really important. It's not an easy thing to do, but it's something that we should definitely be doing and should be doing more of. Kuldip.
Oh, go ahead.
No, you go.
Oh. The other issue is also that our multidisciplinary clinics look like that too, because the clinical trials are happening in those clinics, and that's where the patients are getting recruited from. So if the clinic is not representative, then the trial is not going to be representative. And so you're right, people are not, how do we get people to get to a multidisciplinary clinic so that then they can be participating in a trial? So I think it's both on the care and the trial side. Sorry, Bec.
Yeah, I was just going to sort of agree with what Nick had said, that we have sort of a more newly established lived experience network in Australia, and one of the sort of core focuses for us going forward is to have more diversity on that network. And we had a presentation from a woman with a First Nations woman in Australia whose dad died from ALS. And some of the things that she brought forward, including the fact that First Nations people are really against things like donating their brains or spinal cords to research because of the history of their culture and remains being taken overseas. We just didn't really even think about that. So I think if you don't have those voices talking about what those barriers are, then you won't be able to overcome them.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Do you want to... Just behind you.
Sorry.
Sorry, Kathy.
It's an off-the-wall question. If I gave you $100 million today, what would you do differently?
That's a nice question. Okay, let's take that in turn. Shall we? Do you want to go, Bec?
I have a whole plan.
Okay, go on, Dave. David?
I wouldn't do anything differently because I don't have $100 million. I mean, I think we all think about what could we do with a lot more. And I think it really comes down to the idea of, again, collaboration, complementarity, and having a bigger vision for what's needed in this disease and bringing together people from all parts of the ecosystem to talk about what those gaps are and addressing them effectively and together. And I think that 100 million will go very fast. And I'd like $1 billion. And we will spend it, it will be effective, and we will drive things forward faster. And I absolutely believe if we put the right people in the room and we give them the drive of what they need to do collectively, we are in a good place in this field to be able to do it. So if you can go out and raise $100 million, I think we're happy to help you figure out how to direct that.
I think also we've heard about financial limitation in different scales, right? Like everybody has financial limitations, but we've heard from Jeanine and from LSM, from the Pact Health networks, that really there is an incredible need for investment in those areas. Also to discover heterogeneity and diversity, which we don't really understand now, right? So I think a large part of that 100 million will have to be invested in those areas to bring them up to speed in terms of facilities and resources with what's happening in the rest of the world. And at that point, we'll have a clearer picture, and we can make an informed decision on where to go.
Thank you. Are we good Kathy?
Me?
Yes.
Okay, great, thanks. I still get really excited when I hear stories about tofersen and you know what its impacts are to the ALS MND community. And I just wonder, I know we don't have the entire SAC here or the entire world here, but just in terms of availability going forward and you know, access to that for people that need it. Could you talk a little bit about that? And particularly, Nick, can you talk about what's just happened in the UK?
Yeah, so in terms of accessibility, I mean, that's, again, another area that is difficult. There's not even access for everybody everywhere. And even in developed places like the UK, the regulatory framework to allow people to get access is difficult. So in the case of tofersen, the authorities for people to get access through the national health system have assessed tofersen in the wrong way and have tried to assess it as if it works for everybody with MND rather than the around about 2% of people with an SOD1 gene change, which really shows a kind of naivety of understanding MND and what it is, and that it's different causes, different disease, subsets of disease. So there's been a campaign and lots of work by many people, including the association, to try and get NICE to change its decision. And we've heard recently that they have changed their decision and they will now assess tofersen in the correct manner, we believe. That doesn't necessarily mean that people will get access to the drugs through the National Health, but at least it's a step forward that now Biogen can talk to the National Health Service to get access to people with MND for the drug. I have to say that Biogen have also been providing the drug to people free in the UK who were able to get it, but that couldn't go on indefinitely, so credit to them as well. But credit to people living with MND in the UK that got behind the campaign, filled in a petition, etc. But it shows that, you know, people can move the authorities and the regulators when we all work together, and that's credit to people living and affected by MND. But that's in the UK. You know, it's approved in Europe and the US, but in many other countries, you know, access is going to be very, very difficult indeed. If that answers your question, Kathy.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, obviously, the obvious point too is that if you need access to genetic testing and genetic counselling to even enrol it or be eligible for the therapy, so that's another big issue too.
Yeah. There's a lot of work to do. But the Alliance is, you know, shifting the dial across the world, I think, which is really key. I think we're probably short. We're out of time, are we? Have we got time for one more question? One more? Squeeze on in.
All right, one more. We're going to go back to the funding question, because I really want to take this gentleman up on his offer of $100 million. So here's really my question, though. We've talked about, David, you talked about target engagement, which leads me to believe that where we need to fund on the investment continuum is basic science. We've talked about a problem with VCs maybe removing themselves a bit from the space or being a little skittish, which tells me we need money later on in clinical development. Where do you see the biggest need when you look at the continuum of where this research needs to be funded?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I would say, and it was touched on earlier, really, effective ways of measuring and understanding what targets we're looking for, target engagement and biomarkers, so that we can see whether drugs are working, we can see what happens, we can get these things to people earlier in diagnosis, so we know the drugs are getting where they need to be very early on, and we can't do that without effective biomarkers. So work needs to be done on that, absolutely, and is ongoing considerably as well at the moment. Would anyone like to add to that?
I'd just shout out that, you know, Fight MND held this global roundtable really to assess some of those gaps and bring together a group of people, and we'll continue to expand that out, hopefully with a large group of collaborators to understand what those gaps are. And they, in that group, came up with 7 key areas that they felt were really places we should be investing funds to try to move the needle as quickly as possible. And I think sort of what's come out of it is how do we shave decades off the disease in just a series of years. And I think that will be more widely put out there over the next several months. And right now it's sort of being workshopped, but I think that will hopefully be partially a good answer to what you've asked.
Yeah, thank you. So I think we'll wrap that up there. But just to say that we are all rowing in the same direction, and there's great things happening in motor neuron disease, ALS. It's not perfect by any means right now, but progress is really being made, and everybody's working really hard to try and find the answers in collaboration with people with motor neuron disease, ALS as well, pharmacy and industry as well. So, we'll keep moving forward with the fight. And again, our role as the council is really to try and digest and understand the information so that people can really understand what's happening on the landscape as well. So thank you very much to our panel, and thank you for you all for listening to us today. Thank you.